Okay, ceramics 2, we are about to cut the lid out and make the flange. And then I'm going to work on the textures. And I'm almost done. I'm really kind of rounding. I mean, I'm not almost done, right? I probably have like maybe 2 more hours of carving to do on this piece. Maybe 3 if I'm adding the amount of time it's going to take me to do the lid. But um, still, it still kind of feels like I'm rounding the bend. So right now we have to really look at where do we want this lid to sit. It's kind of like carving a pumpkin. I have this beautiful sort of open surface, and this is kind of like the stem of the pumpkin. This is my handle. My handle is really big and elaborate. So I have to figure out, well, how am I going to cut this out? And it has to go in with the design. It has to kind of work with it. So I'm going to take a needle tool. Now I'm going to just draw some really shallow lines, and I'm going to experiment a little bit with where I want that lid to sit. I think I wanted to kind of go with the angle of the sculpture. And I want it to be pretty big because I'm going to be able to fit my hand in there and pull out whatever I'm going to put in there. So, I have to start thinking about what I might want to put in there. Is it going to be something dry like a cookie jar? Is it going to be something liquidy? What am I containing with this vessel? I really like this point. This happened when I flipped that piece over, and now this used to be the base, the edge of the base. So I'm going to kind of capitalize on that decorative element, and I'm going to put the lid kind of at a point here on this edge. I'll make sure that you guys can see what I can see pretty good. Yeah, okay. And then I'm going to give like maybe the same amount of space on this side as I do on this side, just so that it is substantial on both sides. I want it to be whimsical and kind of go with the curve of the pot too, so thinking about a lot of things when I'm deciding this. And you might even want to not decide right away, like draw one and stand back and look at it and imagine it as the lid. Does that work on both sides? Turn it around, really study it. If it doesn't, redraw your line. Just really make sure that it's where you want it to be. Because once you cut it, it's going to be, you don't want to have to go back in and change it or repair it. You have to kind of commit at that point. Okay, so I like it. I think it's in the right spot. So one trick to cutting this out, and it's the same with the pumpkin. It's like we're carving pumpkins here. And you even use my pumpkin carver. You do not want to cut straight in. You want a bevel. You want to create a bevel, and that bevel will sort of be the start of your flange, or sort of a natural flange. So I'm going to cut in at an angle. And here I go. It's not a very thick piece. I did a good job at making it pretty thin, so the bevel's not going to be huge. Kind of sawing away. I keep trying to imagine or figure out how I'm going to get my pumpkins this year. I don't go to the grocery store right now. I get things delivered to my house, but I don't want the delivery person to pick out my pumpkin. I want to pick it out myself. So I'm sort of thinking I might be brave and go to the pumpkin patch, but you never know what you're going to get when you go out into public. Okay, so here I have this beautiful bevel. Now look at that. And this is going to give me an opportunity. Oh, wow. I have a lot of cleanup to do inside here. I even have a hole in the bottom I didn't even know. There's like a gap where I flipped that piece over that I haven't even fixed yet. So this is a good thing to do, right? And our pieces are leather hard enough that the shape of that lid is going to hold, which is really important for when we put it back down on our piece. Oops. But that bevel is not enough of a flange, so we're going to talk about that. So as you remove your lid and you put it somewhere else, be very careful with how you put it down. I would use some sponges. You don't want it to warp. You want it to just keep its shape. especially if you have a complicated lid. I'm just going to place it just like that. All right, now I'm going to spend a little time cleaning this up. So I'm going to go around and kind of cut my bevel down. These are all important elements when you're working on a clay sculpture or something that's functional. You want the inside to look just as cleaned up and nice as the outside. You want it to look very finished. And the bottom of your sculpture too. So I'm going to have to go in here and roll some coils and do a little repair work. We check the time. I have a half an hour to do this demo. I'm going to spend 10 minutes on this part, and the rest of the time I'm going to make the flange. I know you can't see, but I'm rolling out some fat coils here. I have such a tiny little space with this webcam to work, so I have to like be creative with how I angle it. I'm just making these coils here. They're pretty wide because I'm going to squish them and spread them out. And I need a pretty substantial fix in here too. I've got kind of a hole right there. So make kind of a pancake shape. And then this fork would be really handy right now for the scoring. I've got big areas. Okay, I'm going to score this little pancake piece. Water. And I'm just going to slide it in there and compress, 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 compress. Counter pressure on the other side, even though it's pretty dry, you know, it can hold itself up, but any pressure you put on your piece is going to stress the joints. So it's always a good idea to just get used to doing counter pressure when you're working on your clay pieces. We kind of learn how to handle them, you know. We learn how to babysit them and sculpt them and make sure they don't crack. It's a very delicate art form, working with clay. I have, you know, I added the slab here, and now there's this weird kind of like overlap. So a couple things I can do here. I can get in with my loop tool, and I can kind of carve off that extra clay. And then after I do that, I'm going to go in and add another coil and just smooth it out so it looks like a wall. I don't want to see all that detail. And if I'm storing, if this is a vessel that stores fluid, all of these crevices and cracks and dips eventually will collect places for your liquid to get moldy, and you know, you want the interior of a vessel to be smooth. You don't want a lot of areas where the bacteria can grow. You could take advantage of this loop tool and thin out some areas that look a little thick. It's an amazing carvable state right now, so let's do it. I need a coil inside this raven too. I see a little bit of a gap there. This is why a big lid is helpful too. You can get your hands in there to fix these things. As a clay artist, I have a tendency to work pretty quick, but that's not true for all clay artists. Some clay artists work really, really meticulous and slow, and that's just their style. Sometimes I wonder how if they're teachers, how they teach. You know, if it takes them 40 hours to clean up the inside of a vessel, like how do you can't really show your students that process, because unless you like do a video that's sped up, right? All right, so now I have these big sort of shavings in here. I need to get them out. I'm just gonna kind of dig them out with my hand first. And you know, you might want to save stuff like this. This could be an interesting texture on the surface of your piece. You know, like they did in the olden days, right? When you had to hunt for your food, right? You save your parts. You save all the parts because they could be used as storage for liquid, or like the bladder. I know that some hunters would use the bladder to store liquid or other parts of the animal. Can be useful. So this is our animal here. And our clay is precious, especially now that you don't have access to Miss Greininger's infinite closet of clay. you have to ration. All right, so that looks pretty cleaned up. I'm gonna, oh, I got this side to fix. I mean, it's not cleaned up, but it's enough to put the lid on, I think. I'm gonna go back in later and really clean it up. Okay, so I'm going to look at this beveled edge. It's pretty chunky and bumpy and uneven right now, so I'm going to spend a little time. I don't want to carve away at it too much, right? Because it's the other half of my pumpkin. If I carve away at that bevel too much, then I'm really going to lose this tight fit. I don't want to lose that tight fit. So I'm only going to carve away at it as much as making it sort of a little bit more even. And I might even want to consider adding a little clay to it, like this. See this cut here? I don't like that, so I'm going to actually repair that. So I'm really kind of only carving on the underside of that bevel, which is not the part that fits tight. Going to be this constant cleaning up of the inside here as you shave away and add things to the lid. So I'm going to go back in and score up an area or two where I think need more clay added to it. Just that one spot, I think. Here's an important fact. When you are drawing your piece, you need to leave the lid on your piece because it needs to shrink with your sculpture. If you try to dry these separate, I guarantee you they will not fit back together. You also have to fire them together because they will shrink in the firing. Clay particles are always moving. They only stop moving after you fire them, glaze fire them. Okay, I'm going to continue to, test the fit here just to make sure I'm not carving away. So there's so many different ways you can do a flange. Let's talk about that. If you wanted your sculpture to you wanted the lid to be flush with the body of your piece, you would want to put the flange on the inside. So when you drop it down in there, this remains even, but it doesn't slide around or drop off if you were to tilt your vessel. If you don't like this cut line and you wanted your lid to really look like a lid, you could add a flange on the inside and a coil on the outside that sits over the top of this ridge. And actually really like that idea. I think I'm going to do that to my piece. Because it looks a little unfinished to me just to have this cut line. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to score the edge of my lid pretty deeply, and I'm going to add a big fat coil all around it that's going to overlap onto the body of my sculpture. And before I do that, I'm going to go in and I'm probably going to add a flange to the inside of this. So now I have to look at the underside of this. This needs to be cleaned up. This got some weird ridges here, and this is where I'm adding my flange, so I want it to look nicer. So I'm going to spend a couple minutes scraping and cleaning this up. Okay, I need to move this. Work on the surface. I use my sponges. Such delicate ends here, I just have to be very careful. I'm going to just keep it in my hand, but I'm going to rest my wrist on this sponge just for support and counter pressure. I'm going to go in and I'm going to clean this underside up quite a bit. But I'm not going to change this line. I cannot carve on that because that has to line up with my body. And everybody's sculpture is going to be different. Your sculpture / vessels are all different forms. And you have to make a decision based on your form. Where you put the flange, how you do it, where you carve, how you clean it up. All that is based on your sculpture. This is nice because I can kind of thin this out and and as you're carving, you might say to yourself, I really like that texture. I don't want it to be smooth on the inside. I want it to look kind of like water. And you can decide that, as long as it's not bumpy to the point where you're creating grooves for bacteria to sit in, you can have any texture that you want. Look how fabulously this is shaving off. This gives me a chance to refine the thickness. Clean up any construction that construction thickness that I had before. There's an edge here. It's weird. And maybe you don't like that sharp edge. You can kind of like dull that edge a little bit without losing your fit. I just think it looks better without it. It's more organic looking. But I haven't lost my edge on this side. And then I'm going to add a flange to it. So I could take a sponge and clean it up. Okay, so where does the flange go? This is tricky. To get my sculpture back on the table here. The flange has to fit inside the edge of the body. So when I lift this up, it has to be inside here enough so that it's not interfering with this thickness. So really all you can do is kind of measure this thickness and kind of draw a line on the inside of your lid. And the closer your flange is to that edge, the tighter your fit's going to be. So if you make it too far in, it's pointless, right? Because it's not even touching the edge of your vessel. It's just going to slide around and not act as a flange. The flange has to sit inside the body and hold the lid on top. This is more important when you're dealing with teapots or things that are highly functional and you're tilting them to pour the liquid out and you don't want the lid to slide off. Then you get tea all over yourself and it would not be a functional teapot. For something like this, it's a little less important because it's a sculptural thing and you're not going to be I'm not going to be picking this up and like pouring anything out of it. It's more like a big jar. Alright, so I'm going to squish this over. Ceramics 2, I have a feeling we're going to be working on this probably most of next week. I keep saying it's due on Monday, but I don't want to rush it. I want you to have time to do the things you need to do. So just keep working on it this weekend. Get it to the state that mine is in, and then we'll see. I want to give you time to make sure everything is carved and that your flange fits on there good, and we're not rushing the end of it. Okay, so I want to make my coil long enough that it'll go all the way around. And I don't want it to be too thin because I need some of that clay to attach and smooth out. So just gonna, this is hard to work on because the lid is so delicate. If I went back and did this a second time, I would have put the handle on last, like Christina was talking about with her delicate part. She's gonna wait till the end to put them on, which is very smart. Okay, I'm going to score this up. Crisscross, crosshatch. I'm going to crosshatch this deeper. That's just my drawn line in there. Put a good amount of water on there because the lid is leather hard. Okay. And I'm going to piece again, this is my flange that I'm adding, coil. And right now I'm just compressing it on there, and I will attach it with a tool in a second. Before I even attach it, I want to put it on the body of my sculpture to make sure it fits. Make sure you're attaching the scored area and not another part of the coil. Okay, so there is a flange, the beginning of a flange. Before I compress it too much on there, I'm going to stick it on top. And I'm going to move it around a little bit. Let's see, is it slide? How loose is it? It feels pretty loose, so I think I can push it a little bit closer to the edge here. That's why I didn't super attach it yet, because I wanted to test that. Another little important feature, in fact, when you're drying your lid, really important to put a piece of paper towel between the body and the lid, because if you don't, you could actually suction your lid onto your sculpture and never get it off again. You know, if there's enough moisture in your piece, it could actually like attach itself. Okay, let's try that. Oh yeah, that feels much tighter. Yep, now it's not sliding around anymore, so that's good. So now I'm going to go in with this tool, and I'm going to take this straight edge and just actually physically attach it, and also clean it up too. I'll show you what I'm doing. I'm just going through this edge here and I'm like scraping that coil and dragging it along the edge there, using the thickness of that coil to attach. You guys know who Raffi is? If you have any siblings, you probably do. He's a children's musician, but like he was from the 60s and 70s, or 70s maybe. And you know, some kid music drives me crazy. Like it has to kind of be good music for me to be able to listen to it over and over again with my son. But Raffi is one of those. And but now I have all of his songs in my head, which can drive you a little bit batty if you're not like enjoying them with the kid. They're just kind of like looping in your head. Right now I have the song Banana Phone in my head. Okay, so now I've got this beautifully attached. We're going to end our demo soon. And now I need to go in, and I don't want it to just be this chunky coil, right? I want to refine it. So after I get it fully attached, I'm going to drag my tool along the edge here and try to get like a crisper edge. And then I might even go through and cut this edge into a straighter edge. You know, but I also have to keep in mind too that I've sculpted a very organic looking form already, so it doesn't have to be perfectly straight edged and angular because the rest of my form is not. Paying special attention to the corners here, so like inside here, making sure that's well attached at the joint of the coil, the flange, and also inside. Compression, compression, compression. You kind of notice when I'm working, I have these strategies, right? I'm getting this extra clay that's coming off on the tool, and then I'll take my fingertips and I'll slide it off and just flick it off so I can keep working quickly. These are things that you kind of figure out over time. You just kind of naturally start doing to work faster. You don't even realize it till you really pay attention to what you're doing. Okay, so I'm going to run my tool along the edge here and get that extra clay off of there. Clean it up. Probably go back in when it dries a bit and do some carving on it. And some wiping it down, maybe texturizing it. So many stages. Okay, but basically we have that flange on the inside. So now I'm going to make sure it fits again because I might have warped it a bit by attaching it. It feels a little bit like I need to bend it in and give it a bevel. So it's going to start drying in there, so you have to make sure it's in the right place before you start letting it dry. Okay, so I've got about 4 minutes left. I'm going to roll another coil. I'm going to put it on the outside here so you can see what it looks like when it's draping over. I think it's going to give that lid a little bit more of a fun kind of finished look. I want the coil to be as long as I need it to wrap around the whole lid. Doesn't have to be so thick that it's bulky looking, but I want it to look like an edge. Almost. Okay, the art of rolling out a coil that's even, right? Okay. Speed ceramics. So before I let this lid sit and wrap it up again, remember to put that paper towel in between so it doesn't suction itself on there as it's drying. Okay, here we go. Now I'm not attaching this to the body. I'm attaching it just to the lid right now, and then I'll find a way to kind of overlap it without it attaching. But right now I'm just attaching it to the edge of the lid. Make sure that your coil is lined up with the score marks. This is becoming quite whimsical here. Okay, so that's not all I'm going to do to it, right? I'm going to probably take my finger and attach it on the inside first. And now it kind of looks like a lid, right? It has character. It has a visual line that tells you where the lid is. That's pretty substantial. It's not just a cut in the clay. Now it looks like a different material to me. It looks kind of like fabric, or I don't know, loaf of bread, or a leaf. It has all these different forms that reference other things that are kind of fun. Things you might find in nature. So I could have a sort of a conversation with myself now. Do I like the chunkiness of that edge? Let me show you. You know, think about your bird and think about all these details, right? Do I like that? Or do I want it to be a little thinner? I kind of want it to make sure that it drapes over the edge a little bit, because I'm trying to hide that cut mark. I don't really want to see that. I want it to look a little bit more refined and finished. So I'm just kind of squishing it down so that I'm hiding that edge. I'm going to go back in and add a texture and carve it later, but I like the way it looks now. I like it a lot better than I did just that cut lid. So I have this overlapped edge that's sitting on top. It kind of looks like a big leaf. And then when I pick it up, I've got the flange on the inside that holds the lid in. Now I have to go back and I'm going to have to smooth this coil that I attached onto my piece. So that is pretty much like the last thing I'm going to add to it, unless I get an inspiration a little bit later and I feel like it needs some other sculptural elements. And now all I have to do is all the carving and like addition of detail stuff, right? Reminding you that I wanted to turn this into a bird head, so I'm going to add eyes and carve some feathers in there and refine the beak. And then this is actually a bee, so I need to make this look like a bee. Carve some fuzz and add wings and stuff. And then the rest I have to finish my raven heads over here and clean up the inside. I have so much work to do. So with my lid, I don't want it to stick, right? So I'm going to take a paper towel and I'm going to get that paper towel wet so that it conforms to the inside of the lid. Ceramics 1, if you're here, stick around. I'm going to wash my hands real quick and publish your checkout. Don't leave. Ceramics 1 and 2, also, you need to go wash your hands and post your whips. You get points for your whips every day. Your whip is your work in progress, what you worked on today. Doesn't matter how far you got, I need to see a picture of your piece. Okay, so go do that, and when you come back, you'll have your checkout published. All right, so ceramics 2, I'm going to take this paper towel, and I wrung it out. It's really not that wet. And I'm just going to lay it on the inside of my lid here. It doesn't need to be that long. And this is just going to prevent it from sticking and suctioning itself on. But I want to make sure it's on there tight, because I know if it starts to dry, I don't want it to dry warped. I want it to fit still. I spent all that time making the flange fit. I want to make sure that it's on there tight in the right spot. So just kind of wiggle it around and make sure. Okay. All right, let me go wash my hands, and I'm going to publish your checkouts.